Hello everyone, welcome to video number 6 in our Polymer Clay mini bust slash head tutorial. Going to start sculpting in some of the primary forms. We have our armature skinned. We have a bit of a pose. You can see I've just kind of drawn in some median lines and some horizontal lines. This is not the mouth and eyes or anything like that. It's just reminding me where this is sitting in space. It's no longer sitting straight up like the first drawing. It's actually moved a bit and moved off that way. So I like to keep those reference marks there. I've mixed up quite a bit of clay with some flocking in it. It's kind of leaning towards blue, fairly gray. That felt appropriately alien. I have decided that I am going to use these two very bloodshot eyes with no iris and fairly large pupil. And I've got reference material out. So I've got my head that I can then reference. Again, I like to have the skull, and I do have some. This looks a little bit Marty Feldman like, but I do like to have these eyes so I can look at what, how the eyes actually sit in the socket. And you probably can't see them all, but I do have some new reference photos, including some of my own eye that I took. The one down in the bottom right, I did wash my hands thoroughly before pulling my eyelid down, but that's sort of the effect that I want. I want a fairly droopy eyelid on the upper lid, and I want that lower lid to be sagging unnaturally. And right straight ahead of me, I've got my primary drawing. Even though it's straight up and down because that's how we needed to build the armature, I like to keep that right in my line of sight so that as I'm working on the model, I can be, just close one eye, I can just, look between them really quickly. Okay, so I think we'll get started. So the other thing I've done is I've cut up one of my references. This gets a little bit trickier again because we're no longer in the straight up pose, right? We've kind of tilted, but what I'm going to use this for is thinking about the mass. The other thing I'm going to do is use it to map out where I want the eyes and the mouth. I'll make some reference marks, and so I'm going to start with that. I'll do my best to keep the piece in a good sight line for you, but I'll have to balance that with actually being able to see what I'm doing. So putting a mark for the center of the eye, and a mark. This actually does become pretty close to the mouth and kind of bottom of the nose, and I'm trying to go horizontal with that. I'm just going to sneak this over, and in human anatomy, the corner of the eye, if you go right back, that's where you hit where the ear attaches. That's why our eyeglasses tend to sit horizontal, the arms of our eyeglasses. This is fairly accurate for human anatomy, where the bottom of the ear does tend to line up between somewhere between the top lip and the bottom of the mouth. This is obviously quite exaggerated, so I am going to make a mark for where that top of the ear is, and I'll put it near the back of the head. So I've got these marks, and I'm going to trace them around to the other side, and that when I'm checking the masses, that gives me a little bit of a reference point where to So I'm putting the paper, the reference, the template in the same spot every time. Okay, more sculpting, less talking, right? So let me just start with, I think I'm going to start with just some of the masses. And I know these are my, that's my eyes. So I've got this, these zygomatic bones here. I forget which is the arch and which is the process, but that's okay. So similar to the eyeballs, I recommend taking one chunk of clay and splitting it into two pieces, two equal pieces. Okay, and it'll be very common for us to work with these kind of bean shapes. And smaller pieces than you think you need. It's a lot easier to, in this early point, to work in an additive approach rather than trying to carve away. And I think I said this earlier in an earlier video. Polymer is a type of material that is really conducive to kind of pushing forms around rather than you know, carving. Okay, so I've got a couple cheek forms here. Again, trying to use both hands at the same time to try to keep some sense of symmetry. I can probably go a little bit heavier on those. Okay, so we're just looking at large chunks of geometry for now. If you're not familiar with anatomy, you know, you can have some anatomical references out. But in these early stages, two pieces at the same time. And I understand that faces aren't perfectly symmetry, but the basic muscle forms are close enough to symmetrical that that I recommend working this way. Okay, so I've got those. I want those folds to be fairly prominent, so sculpting those in. Maybe some more pads here on those cheeks. I don't want them too heavy. Yeah, actually, I think I'll put those there. Okay, using both hands at the same time, just squishing them in. And again, primary forms, no detail required. Also want to move your model around, move your sculpt around. Look at it from both sides. Look at it from the back. Look at it from the top. There's not a whole lot going on in the top yet. Something that's important to remember with humanoid anatomy is the eyes in particular. They do wrap around kind of the sphere shape or the curved shape of the head. They don't sit flat like they would on a drawing, unless we're talking about, I guess, SpongeBob or Minecraft. But in reality, that head is a little bit curved. Okay, so that's why I want to look at it from the top and avoid everything just being straight on. And that takes some practice to get used to moving the the piece around, particularly if you're used to working two-dimensionally, working in drawing, where you're only ever looking at one pose at a time and then moving into 3D. And that goes for sculpting digitally or traditionally. If you're working on a 3D model, you can really get into trouble by only looking at one point of view for too long. Okay, so I need to build quite a bit of mass up in here, and then I can start kind of coming forward with these cheeks. I need a little bit of chin, not on the width. I feel like the width of the chin is pretty good, but certainly bulking the face out this way. So important to keep checking. So I'm going to do that. The other thing I'm going to get in fairly soon, I've got and I keep putting in my my eye line so that I'll put in the nose there too. I want to put in a bit of a brow. That's fairly important in this design. Even if I have to, you know, I'm going to have to add quite a bit out here. But I do want to at least get a suggestion of those forms and blend in the top, but kind of leave the bottom kind of heavy hanging over for now. Okay, so I'm just going to continue adding these primary forms, looking profile, straight on, profile, straight on, checking from the back, checking from the top, particularly when I get the face built out. I had mentioned that I didn't want to put armature here because I want to be able to put quite a bit of clay in, so I can, using oversized eyes, I want to dig those sockets in pretty deep. But at least I've got a bit of a start, and we haven't put in any detail, but we've got some guidelines. So I'm going to work on that. Okay, so just to check back in, I know it probably looks like this has come a very long way, and it has in some ways, but all I've done is I've kept doing exactly what we were just talking about in the previous segment, is taking individual little chunks, little pieces of geometry, applying them in some sort of symmetrical manner. So I did add a lot of mass out this way on the face. I also bulked up quite a bit here, but that's pretty straightforward. That's pretty easy. But even though I added a lot of mass, I kept those very early forms that I put on, the brow, a little bit of the cheek, these nasolabial folds, my landmarks for the nose and mouth. I kept that the same and just kept building it forward and looking from here. Now there's a lot of refinement that needs to go on. Okay, and that's where we'll move to. The only reason I kind of put this chunk on relatively smooth is it does help me to read the overall form. That's something that I don't want to be too distorted. And then it just kind of happened that these kind of ridges evolved just by me pushing my thumb into it. So I just accentuated them just so I can have a look at it along the way. So that's how some of the design can evolve. So there's not a whole lot of expression. There is going to be some fairly heavy brows, and you know, this part of the brow will sag. Have got the basic form so that the kind of jowls can sag. but at this point, the sculpture seems kind of lifeless, and you have to accept that the sculpture, it takes a long time before it starts to look anywhere close to being finished, and so you have to be okay with it looking like this. Obviously, we're not going to leave these two little lumps for the chin, but we need to be able to look beyond that to say, okay, and they're about the right size and they're in the right spot, so I can refine them later and can blend all these shapes in, and we'll be working towards that shortly. The other important aspect of this pose, and it's this expression, and it's been important right from the start, is the eyes. And so with just these giant sockets, and again, that's why it's important for me to have the skull as the reference, being a humanoid form, being able to look at the skull and look at the sockets and the shape of the sockets and the location and how the bridge of the nose and the eye sockets work together. It's really important to have that reference, whether it's an actual skull or a photograph. But so much of it is in the eyes, and in not just the eyeballs, but the lids of the eyes. And until we get there, it has this kind of lifeless feel to it. That's why we cook made and bake the eyeballs, because we are at the point where we can place them now. So I do recommend that you dig out sockets, and then you got to be really patient. Dig out sockets rather than just pushing it into the clay. So this can be super frustrating. I'm just going to put them in to see. I might have the sockets a little deep. I'd rather they were a little bit deep. Just kind of looking at that from the side. Looks okay. He's looking up and that way a little bit more than the drawing, but that might be okay. And again, we have to imagine that there's going to be lids as well. And remember, because the head is tilted, the eyes need to, so I'll need to adjust that a little bit. Okay, that's not bad. That's coming. So my sockets were maybe a little bit high. Yeah, I can see my line, and I've got the eyeballs in the right spot. So I think what I'll do next is I'll pack a little bit of clay in behind the eyes, and then I will place them and start to sculpt the lids, and I will do that. I'll do that step by step on the video. So I'm not going to do any more refinement. I'm going to just get set up to remove the eyes, pack in a little bit of clay in behind, set them exactly where I want them. I don't know why I insist on farting around right now, because I can't help it. I'm going to photograph it from here as well. Maybe try a couple different things on the eyes. Yeah, I need to really push that forward too. It's a little more accurate on this side, so I've lost a little bit of my symmetry. So those are the things I will work on, and then we will place the eyes, and we'll actually start to sculpt in the lid. And what you will see just humor me for a second. So we have this kind of bug-eye look right now. But when we can start thinking about the lid, see how much that changed already? That's a horrible lid, but that's okay. Okay, just by drooping it over the eye, it just has a much more subdued expression. So on here I'm going to drop the brow, and then I'm going to put the lids on, and also drop the lids at this angle, similar to the drawing, just so it has that kind of more serious look to it, right? A little bit disappointed, some sort of expression. So, all right, we'll gear up for that. Thanks.